Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever stopped to think about how a single, intimate conversation, just happening quietly in a family tent, could literally redraw the borders of a nation for centuries to come? Well, welcome to today's Explainer, because we are looking at exactly that. We're getting into one of the most fascinating, pivotal, and honestly dramatic moments in ancient history. We're looking at Genesis 48. Now, at first glance, this chapter kind of just reads like a heartwarming story, right? A grandfather blessing his grandkids. But as we unpack the source material today, you're going to see that it's actually this masterful legal maneuver, and it forever changed the geopolitical landscape of ancient Israel.
To get us started, I want to pose a real historical mystery to you. If you've ever looked at a map of the 12 tribes of Israel from antiquity, you might have noticed a pretty glaring omission. Think about it. Joseph is arguably the most famous of all of Jacob's sons. I mean, he's the guy with the coat of many colors, the one who literally saved his entire family from famine, the second in command of all of Egypt. Yet, if you look at the territorial maps of the Promised Land, there is absolutely no tribe of Joseph. Crazy, right? Why is that? How does the absolute hero of the story not get a plot of land named after him? Well, the answer to that mystery is exactly what we're going to uncover in today's Explainer, and it all traces right back to the events of Genesis 48.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 1, A Grandfather's Final Days. So, the patriarch Jacob, who is also known as Israel, has lived this incredibly long, eventful life. But his final days are finally upon him. He's getting old, his health is failing, and word of this eventually reaches his son Joseph. Now, remember, Joseph isn't just any son. He is the vizier of Egypt. He's a man of immense power and massive responsibility. But the second he hears about his dad's illness, Joseph drops absolutely everything. He brings his two sons, Manasseh, who's the older firstborn, and Ephraim, the younger brother, to visit their dying grandfather. Joseph is probably just expecting, a standard farewell. But Jacob has something entirely different up his sleeve.
Section 2. The Adoption and the Double Portion. What feels like just a quiet, intimate family moment very quickly turns into an event carrying massive legal and financial weight. Jacob literally sits up in bed and makes this completely unprecedented declaration. He says, "Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine." Guys, this isn't just sweet grandfatherly affection here. No, Jacob is formally, legally adopting his own grandsons. He is elevating them to the exact same status as his own actual first and second-born sons.
Okay, so why does this adoption matter so much? It's absolutely crucial that we understand the ancient Near Eastern legal concept of the double portion. Back in this culture, the firstborn son didn't just get a pat on the back. He traditionally received a double share of the family's wealth, their land, their entire inheritance, compared to his brothers. It was the ultimate birthright. So, by elevating Joseph's two sons to the status of his own direct sons, Jacob is setting up a totally brilliant legal mechanism to pass along this massive inheritance.
Here's the thing, Jacob's actual biological firstborn was a guy named Reuben. But if we look earlier in the Genesis narrative, Reuben profoundly disrespected his father. He committed a really grievous offense that essentially stripped him of his firstborn rights entirely. And because Reuben forfeited that right, Jacob redirects it to Joseph, who happens to be the firstborn son of his most beloved wife, Rachel. So, by adopting Ephraim and Manasseh, Jacob is basically using a legal maneuver to pass that ultimate firstborn status directly over to Joseph. Through his two adopted boys, Joseph is literally going to get two shares of the future promised land. Talk about a game changer.
Section 3, The Blessing Reversal. Alright, so with the legal adoption out of the way, the boys are now positioned to receive the patriarchal blessing. But Jacob's failing eyesight introduces a pretty major twist here. Joseph steps in to manage the situation. Knowing his dad can barely see a thing, he logically aligns the boys according to strict tradition. He guides Manasseh, the older firstborn, toward Jacob's right hand, because the right hand was always reserved for the primary blessing in their culture. Then he places the younger boy, Ephraim, toward the left. It's totally orderly, it completely respects the birth order, and it makes perfect sense, right?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how human expectation collides drastically with Jacob's reality. While tradition absolutely dictated that Manasseh was positioned for that right-hand blessing, Jacob entirely subverts the alignment. Without us even needing to picture the physical act of how he does it, Jacob totally bypasses Joseph's careful setup. He makes absolutely sure that Ephraim, the younger brother, is the one who receives the primary right-hand blessing. In one fell swoop, he completely rewrites the destiny of these two boys.
You can just imagine the tension in the room at this point. Joseph actually gets visibly upset. He thinks his blind, elderly father is just making a foolish mistake.
The text tells us Joseph physically tries to hold up his father's hand to correct him, protesting, "Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head." But Jacob vehemently refuses. He replies with absolute, unwavering certainty, "I know it, my son, I know it." He acknowledges that Manasseh will be great, for sure, but insists, "Truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." This wasn't an accident, folks. It was a deliberate prophecy.
Section 4. Subverting Human Tradition.
Let's zoom out from this specific family drama for just a second. This deliberate shifting of the blessing, it isn't just some quirky, one-off mistake made by an old man. It is a major, recurring motif that runs all throughout the source text, basically flipping societal norms right on their head. Time and time again, human tradition expects the older sibling to inherit the power. Yet God repeatedly chooses the younger. He chose Abel over Cain, Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau, and right here, through Jacob, he chooses Ephraim over Manasseh. And this brilliantly illustrates just how stunningly consistent this pattern really is.
The theological takeaway from all of this is absolutely profound. The text is making a crystal clear argument here. Divine election and blessings are based entirely on sovereign grace. They are not based on human merit, they're not based on who managed to be born first, and they certainly aren't bound by whatever societal expectations govern our human hierarchies. God actively and repeatedly bypasses what we think is the proper order of things.
Section 5. Shaping the 12 Tribes.
So let's pivot back to the grand historical scale and finally answer that map mystery we posed at the very beginning of the explainer. How exactly did this one blessing redefine the entire geography of the Promised Land? Well, the math actually explains it perfectly. You start with Jacob's 12 original sons. Then we subtract the tribe of Levi because they were designated as the priesthood, meaning they had no physical land borders. That leaves 11. Then we subtract Joseph because, as we saw, he doesn't get a single tribe named after him. That leaves 10. Finally, we add his two newly adopted sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who represent that double portion. 10 plus 2 brings us right back to 12 distinct territorial allotments. So Joseph's legacy isn't missing at all. It's literally doubled.
And the historical ripple effects of this one single deathbed decision, it is just staggering. Jacob prophesied that the younger brother, Ephraim, would be greater, right? Well, fast forward centuries later, and the tribe of Ephraim becomes incredibly large, powerful, and absolutely dominant. In fact, they become so dominant in the northern kingdom of Israel that later biblical prophets, guys like Hosea and Isaiah, they actually stop saying the northern kingdom altogether. They just refer to the entire nation simply as Ephraim. Jacob's blind prophecy became undeniable historical reality.
As Jacob concludes this really incredible sequence, he offers one final thought to the boys. He says, "In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh." This specific moment was so culturally defining that it became the absolute gold standard for blessings. To this very day, thousands of years later, this exact formula is still spoken over children as a blessing, carrying forward the legacy of these two boys who were elevated entirely by grace.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to consider today. If ancient history teaches us anything through this story in Genesis 48, it's that the expected path is rarely the one that actually unfolds. So what does this mean for us? How often are our own societal expectations, our strict rules about merits and who deserves what, completely subverted by unexpected historical twists or sovereign grace? The next time you look at a map, or really any kind of hierarchy, just remember, sometimes the greatest impact comes from the ones you least expect to be chosen. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you on the next one.